The rain hammered against my windows, turning the streets of Maple Hollow into silver rivers. I was curled up on my thrift store couch, laptop balanced on my knees, tweaking a client's website while sipping lukewarm coffee. Nights like this made me grateful for my quiet life, a life far from the Calloway family drama I'd escaped 4 years ago. Then came the knock. It wasn't tentative or polite. It was quick, urgent, almost swallowed by the rumble of thunder. I set the laptop aside and padded to the door, expecting maybe a neighbor with a blown fuse or a lost delivery driver. Instead, when I pulled the door open, the storm poured in along with the sight that made my stomach drop. A baby carrier sat on the porch, rainwater pooling beneath it. Inside, swaddled in a damp blanket, was a tiny baby, her dark eyes locked on mine as if she'd been waiting. My pulse thudded in my ears. The wind tore at a piece of paper tucked under the blanket, nearly sending it skittering away. I caught it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was instantly familiar sharp. Impatient strokes. Gareth's. We can't do this. She's yours now. Below his name was Leona's, written in a neater, more deliberate hand. My brother and his wife. For a moment, I just stood there, the storm soaking my sweater, trying to process the absurdity. The Calloways didn't do unplanned. They curated their lives like magazine spreads. And Gareth. He was always the golden son until he married Leona and their fights became public. The baby made a soft, breathy sound. It jolted me out of my daze. I scooped up the carrier, shutting the door against the weather. My tiny living room felt even smaller with the sudden weight of her presence. She wasn't crying, just watching me, measuring me. I pressed a hand to my forehead. I didn't have a crib, formula, diapers, nothing. But I had this child now, and in the echo of the storm outside. That felt like the only fact that mattered. I set the carrier on the couch and stared at my phone, already knowing who I'd call first, even if I dreaded hearing her voice. I stared at the carrier on my couch, the baby's steady gaze never leaving mine. My hands moved on instinct, reaching for my phone, scrolling to the number I'd sworn I'd never call unless it was life or death. This felt like both. Margot answered on the second ring, her voice clipped, as if I'd interrupted something important. Sabine, do you know what time it is? Mom, Gareth, and Leona, they left a baby on my porch. Their baby. There's a note. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. She's your burden now. What no? You heard me. This is exactly why Gareth couldn't trust you to handle things discreetly. Keep this quiet. Do not involve anyone who can drag the family name into this. I'm not equipped for your brother made his choice. Now you make yours. Your father agrees. I heard the muffled sound of Philip's voice in the background. Then the final blow. Do not call here again about this. The line went dead. I sat frozen. The hum of the refrigerator loud in the sudden stillness. The baby shifted slightly, the blanket slipping just enough for me to see her tiny fingers curl into a fist. I thought about dialing social services, my thumb hovering over the contact, but the image of her being taken away to strangers, shuffled from home to home, tightened something in my chest. Instead, I lifted the carrier onto the dining table and pulled out the note again. Beneath it, crumpled in the folds of the blanket, was a half-completed birth certificate application. No full name, just a date, December 21st, winter solstice. Light in the darkest time, I whispered, brushing my hand over her cheek. Isla, that's who you are. Her eyes closed, lashes brushing her skin, and I realized there was no going back. She was mine now, in every way that mattered. I reached for my keys, knowing the first of many late-night errands was waiting. The first week with Isla felt like stumbling into a life I'd never trained for. My days blurred into a cycle of bottle prep, diaper changes, and bleary-eyed searches for answers on parenting forums at 3 in the morning. Every time I sat down to work on a client's site, She'd fuss or need feeding. I learned to type one-handed while cradling her, my shoulders aching from the constant juggle. The part-time marketing job I'd taken to steady my income was less forgiving after calling in sick twice in the first month. My manager's tone turned clipped. The third time. She didn't bother hiding her frustration. We need reliability. Sabine, I'm sorry, but we have to let you go. I hung up before my voice could crack, staring at the empty coffee cup beside the laptop that now represented my only source of income. So I doubled down on freelance work. I took late-night design gigs, editing logos while Isla slept in her second-hand crib pushed up against my desk. My savings dwindled, but each morning I woke to her quiet coo or the way she kicked her blanket off and grinned at me, and somehow it felt worth the exhaustion. By month 3, I'd found a rhythm. I could rock her with my foot while tweaking code, warm a bottle with one hand while answering client emails with the other. The chaos didn't disappear, but it became ours. Still, in the quiet moments, I couldn't forget the night she arrived. I kept the note Gareth had written, the incomplete birth form, and every voicemail or email from him and Leona since. I labeled the folder Isla, important, and stored both the physical papers in a locked desk drawer and scanned copies on a password-protected drive, just in case, because if my family had taught me anything, it was that the past had a way of knocking on your door when you least expected it, and when it did, I intended to be ready. 10 years can pass in a blink when each day is filled with school drop-offs, art projects taped to the fridge, and evenings spent listening to a child chatter about the colors she mixed in art class. Isla had grown from that silent bundle in a damp blanket into a whirlwind of paint-splattered jeans, quick wit, and boundless curiosity. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, and the kitchen smelled faintly of pancakes and acrylic paint. Isla was at her friend Marin's house for a weekend sleepover, giving me a rare, quiet morning to sort through client files. That peace shattered with a knock at the door, loud, insistent, nothing like the tentative taps of a neighbor. The moment I opened the door, my breath caught. Gareth stood there, older but still carrying himself like the world owed him a smile. Beside him, Leona in a tailored coat and flawless hair, her expression polished and cool. Behind them, my parents, Philip stiff as a board, Margot's eyes sharp and appraising and at the edge. A man in a gray suit clutching a leather briefcase. Sabine, Gareth said smoothly, as if we'd just run into each other at the grocery store. We need to talk about our daughter. My fingers tightened on the edge of the door. Your daughter. You mean the child you left on my doorstep in the middle of a storm? Leona's smile didn't falter. We believe it's time to discuss custody arrangements. The man in the suit stepped forward. Ronald Drake, representing Gareth and Leona Calloway. We'd like to resolve this civilly. I planted my foot behind the door, keeping it from opening farther. You're not coming in. Leona's tone turned honeyed. Sabine, let's be adults about this. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to a number I hadn't used in months. I am being an adult, I said. Pressing call, and I'm making sure you don't get the chance to twist this. Connor Hale answered on the second ring, his calm voice instantly steadying me. What's going on? They're here, I said, eyes locked on Gareth's. And they're not leaving without a fight. Connor arrived in less than 15 minutes, his Navy sedan pulling into the driveway just as Gareth's lawyer started to speak again. Without waiting for an invitation, Connor stepped inside, brushing past Ronald Drake with the kind of quiet authority that made people move. I'm Connor Hale, he said, setting his briefcase on my coffee table. I represent Ms. Calloway. Whatever you have to say. You'll say to both of us. Drake's lips pressed into a thin line, but he slid a neat stack of papers across the table. My clients are seeking full custody of their biological daughter. The claim is based on alienation and withholding family contact over the past decade. We also have evidence of refusal to facilitate communication. I almost laughed sharp and humorless. Communication. The only thing they've sent in 10 years were 2 birthday cards with no return address and a Christmas card that arrived in March. Sabine, Connor murmured, his voice low. A warning to keep my temper in check. He flipped through the paperwork, his expression unreadable. Noted. We'll be responding in due course. Margot shifted in her seat, her pearl necklace catching the light. We all know this situation was never meant to be permanent. It's time she's brought back into the family where she belongs. I stood, crossed to my desk, and unlocked the bottom drawer. The steel clink of the key in the lock felt deliberate, final. I returned with a thick manila folder, edges worn from years of being handled but never opened without purpose. I set it in front of Connor. This, I said, my eyes on Gareth, is every note, voicemail, and email I've received from you or Leona since the night you left her. Every gap in your so-called attempts to reach out, and every time you or anyone in this family made it clear Isla was a problem to be hidden, not a person to be loved. Leona's perfect composure faltered for just a moment. Gareth looked away. Connor rested a hand on the folder. This will be sufficient for now. I strongly suggest we end this meeting before it escalates further. Drake hesitated, then began packing up the documents. We'll see you in court. When the door finally closed behind them, the air felt heavier. Charged. Connor stayed seated, his hand still on the folder as if anchoring it to the table. They're not bluffing. Sabine, he said quietly. And neither can we. Connor called the next afternoon, his voice brisk. I've looped in Elena Vargas. She's sharp, discreet, and very good at finding the truth people don't want found. 2 days later, we met in Connor's office. Elena was tall, with a cool, assessing gaze and a leather satchel stuffed with files. She spread them across the desk without preamble. Your brother and his wife didn't suddenly remember they have a daughter. She said, they remembered a trust fund. She tapped a highlighted clause in a photocopied will. It was my grandmother's, my father's mother. She'd left a $2 million trust for Gareth's firstborn, but there was a condition the child had to be raised within the Calloway family to access it. The funds were locked until Isla turned 18, but if they got custody now, they'd control it as trustees. My stomach twisted. So this was never about her. Not in the way they want the court to believe. Elena said, and it gets worse. She slid over a stack of glossy photographs. Gareth and Leona at charity galas, ski resorts, on the deck of a yacht, dates stamped in the corners covering almost every year since Isla's birth. Not one picture hinted at a struggle or the kind of hardship they'd insinuated in Drake's custody filing. They've had money, connections, and time. Elena continued. They just didn't have access to that trust. Until now. When they realized there's a way to get it. Connor leaned back, watching me absorb it all. This changes the narrative. We're not just defending custody, we're exposing a financial scheme. I picked up one of the photos. Gareth laughing with a champagne glass in hand. Leona beside him in a gown that probably cost more than my rent for a year. My fingers tightened on the edges. They're going to spin this, Connor warned. They'll say the trust was meant to secure her future, that they're financially stable and can provide more than you can. I met his gaze. Then we prove stability isn't the same as love, and that their idea of providing has nothing to do with Isla's needs. Elena slid the will back into her satchel. Good, because they're not going to play nice from here on out. Elena didn't waste time. Within a week, she'd arranged meetings with people who had seen more than my family ever wanted them to. The first was Martha Gaines, my next-door neighbor since I moved to Maple Hollow. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I never forgot that night. She said rain was coming down in sheets. I saw Gareth's car pull up. He and Leona carried the baby carrier to your porch, set it down, and left. Didn't even knock. Didn't check if your lights were on. Just drove off. Her words hit like a replay of the memory I couldn't shake. She signed an affidavit before leaving, her voice steady, her eyes kind. Next came Claudia Mendez, who had worked for my parents for over a decade before they let her go 2 months ago. She laid out a folder of photocopies on Connor's desk emails, typed notes, and a printed custody agreement template dated 6 months before Gareth ever knocked on my door. They were planning this for a while. She said, "Your mother called you a temporary solution." They wanted to wait until the timing worked for them, if I had any lingering illusions about their motives. They crumbled right there. The final meeting was with Derek Sloan, Gareth's former business partner. He met us in a coffee shop, eyes darting toward the windows as if he half expected Gareth to walk in. "It's about the trust fund," he said bluntly. "Always was. Gareth told me they'd get Isla back, access the money, and invest it into a new venture. Leona didn't even pretend it was about family. He agreed to testify if needed, his voice low but resolute. She deserves better than to be their payday. By the end of the week, I had more truth in my corner than I'd ever expected truth from people who had no obligation to me, yet still stepped forward. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and tension. Gareth and Leona sat at the petitioner's table, dressed as if for a magazine spread, he in a tailored navy suit, she in a pale blue dress that whispered respectable mother. Their smiles were calculated, their posture perfect. When our case was called, Connor rose first, setting the thick, worn manila folder on the evidence table. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "this contains a decade of documented abandonment." The judge opened the file. On top was the note Gareth had left with Isla's carrier, the ink smudged from rain. Beneath it, printed transcripts of voicemails, Gareth's voice promising to send money next month, Leona's saying she needed space before she could take the baby back. Email threads followed, each one damning in its absence of follow-through. Martha Gaines testified first, her voice firm as she described watching Gareth and Leona drive away that stormy night. Claudia Mendez took the stand next, producing documents that showed custody plans had been in motion months before their visit. Finally, Connor played a recording. Derek Sloan's voice came through the speakers. Unmistakable. "It's about the trust fund. $2 million. Get the kid. Get the money." A ripple moved through the gallery. I stood when Connor nodded to me. Walking toward the witness stand, I turned to face Gareth and Leona. "What's Isla's favorite color?" Silence. "What is she allergic to?" Leona's lips parted, but no words came. Her best friend's name. The sport she plays. Nothing. I turned back to the judge. "They don't know her, Your Honor. They've never tried." The judge's decision came swift and sharp. Case dismissed with prejudice. An investigation into the trust fund would begin immediately. A restraining order was issued, forbidding any contact outside legal channels. As the gavel fell, I felt the weight in my chest loosen for the first time in months. Within a week, the headlines were everywhere. $2 million trust fund at center of custody battle. Photos of Gareth and Leona at galas were splashed across news sites, alongside court transcripts that made their motives plain. The Calloway name, once polished to a gleam, was now synonymous with greed. Gareth and Leona disappeared quietly, their social media accounts wiped, their house put on the market. My parents issued no statements, retreating from their clubs and luncheons as if the world had turned its back on them. For once, they seemed to understand what silence felt like. Life in Maple Hollow returned to its slower rhythm. But inside our home, something had shifted. One evening, after homework and dinner, Isla sat across from me at the kitchen table, fiddling with a pen. "I've been thinking," she said, glancing up. "I don't want my last name anymore. Not theirs." I set my fork down. "What do you want instead?" "Yours," she said simply. "I want to be Isla Hart. Hart, my mother's maiden name, the one I'd taken back when I left the Calloway estate for good." I hadn't expected to hear it from her, but the way she said it clear, certain, left no room for doubt. "That's a big change," I said carefully. "I've thought about it for months." She replied, "You chose me that night. I want to choose you back. All the way." My throat tightened. Then we'll make it official. Her smile was small but sure. Good, because I've already been practicing my signature. She slid a sheet of notebook paper across the table, her new name written over and over in her careful hand. I traced a fingertip over the letters, already planning the first step we'd take tomorrow. The next morning, we sat side by side in Connor's office, a neat stack of adoption forms between us. Isla leaned forward, reading each page as though it were a contract for the life she'd been waiting for. Connor walked us through the process petitions, hearings, the judge's signature, but my focus stayed on her, steady, eager expression. Filling in the blanks felt almost ceremonial. Every pen stroke, every date and signature anchored the life we had already been living. By the time we left, the first step was official, and Isla clutched her copy of the paperwork like it was treasure. That night, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Isla padded into the living room in her pajamas, curling up beside me on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder for a moment before speaking. "You'll always stay." "Right." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were steady, but I could see the shadow of every doubt she'd been made to carry. "Always." I said, "The universe got it right the first time." She exhaled softly, as if something heavy had finally been set down, and tucked her feet under the blanket. I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the simple weight of belonging settle between us, long after she'd fallen asleep against me. I stayed there, listening to her slow breathing. I thought about that night in the rain, about every fight, every moment we'd had to prove that love wasn't a performance, it was a choice made again and again. Family wasn't just the people you were born to, it was the ones who showed up, stayed, and built something worth holding on to. And we had chosen each other, forever.